This is the Spirit and Wellness Show. News and information from a higher perspective. With your host, Harry Wilkinson.
Yes, welcome to the Spirit and Wellness Show. I am your host, Harry Wilkinson, and this is the show where we take a look at the days and weeks, events, happenings in the world of politics, entertainment, health, wellness, technology, all of these things, and we take a look at them from a higher perspective. And from a higher perspective, what I mean by that is from what some would call a spiritual perspective, or some might be more comfortable with a term like metaphysical, or maybe even a philosophical point of view. Some people relate to it on that level. People I've heard talk about the program to me have mentioned that it seems to them, the impression that they get is that it is more about philosophy. And just full disclosure, people who say that to me are people who are coming from a fairly strict religious background, and they kind of don't see, talking about spirituality, if it doesn't involve their traditional belief system, then it isn't spiritual to them, which is very interesting. But we'll get into that later. But what I mean by spiritual is, and the perspective I take on this show is that we take a look at these events as if, or from the point of view of, we are creating everything that's happening in our world. And we're creating it on a level that is not our everyday mundane level that we're aware of, in our everyday life, but at the highest level of our being, at the place where we are actually one. We are part of divine mind. And we create this world, and they are creations. They are ultimately, they are illusions, because they are not the truth of who and what we are. And that's why we call them illusions. It's not that they don't feel real, and it's not that they don't have, it's not that there aren't consequences and things that flow from them. It's just like if you are playing a game, whether it be a sport like baseball or football, or a board game like Monopoly. Once the game gets started, you play by the rules of the game, and that's very real. And anything that happens in that context, has its own repercussions and has its own, ways of dealing with it. But it's still just that game. It's not the truth of who and what you are. You've just chosen to play for a while in this field, following these particular rules. And that's what, on a broader scale, I purport to you, that the things that we engage in every day are, in reality, games that we've chosen to play at a much higher level, as I say, on a metaphysical level, okay? We'll use that word. So that in our physical incarnation, we can engage in these stories, these scenarios, these situations, and experience things, and have, adventures, for lack of a better word, and also be reminded of who and what we really are. It always brings us back. Once you go in deep enough, once you get past the button pushing of these stories in our world, if you can get past them, and that in and of itself is a very difficult scenario. But if you can get past them, if you can take a look at them from a higher perspective, you can begin to see, first of all, you take energy from any situation that you may have created, particularly in your own life, and you recognize what you've created, and you recognize the brilliance of it. That's a trick too. That's a really tough trick, and something that you can get into in meditation when you really go into a situation and you see the energy that you put into creating it to perhaps make you feel a certain way, make you deal with certain issues, and help you grow and evolve as a person. And it's relatively easy to see if you look back, years ago and think about the things that you personally might have been going through. And take a look at where you are now and see how those things you were dealing with helped you to become the person that you are now. So that's what we're doing. That's the game that we're playing. Every physical incarnation, I think, that we take has meaning, and I believe it has there is a certain purpose to it. There's a certain design to it that our higher mind or higher self, or however you want to say it, has designed for us. And so this is a long way around saying that we need to look at our world in maybe a broader perspective, in that context, where we can take a step back, look at what's happening, see the brilliance of the illusion, take the energy from it if it's something that causes disturbance and something that maybe you're ready to move on from, and see what happens. It's all it's like a laboratory in a way. We believe, or we're taught to believe, that we can't change things just by, thinking about them, or, meditating on them, or praying. How ridiculous is that? But it's not. It is literally what makes things happen, and it is literally what changes things. It's all about energy. And we know that scientifically. This is not, mystical mumbo jumbo anymore. We know, due to the fact that, and we continue to find out through the exploration of quantum physics, through the discovery of things like the God particle that was just now been confirmed. Well, not just now, but a year or so ago, after 20 years of speculating that it was there, but not having proof that was satisfactory to scientists. Now they have it. Now they have, satisfactory proof of the existence of gravitational waves. In other words, everything on this planet, everything in the universe is giving off energy. We can't see it, but we can feel it, and we can observe its influences. More and more science is beginning to understand what I will, for lack of a better term, call the mystical nature of our being. And, I spoke about that last week. Last week's show was all about, science and spirituality coming together in the transition era. And this is usually the spot in the show where I explain to those who may not have heard the show before what I mean by the transition era. The transition era simply means that this time in which we live is a very special and extraordinary time in which the seeds of really extraordinary change, revolutionary change in all areas of what we think of as human existence, the economy, politics, uh, technology, science, religion, all of these things are evolving in a rapid and uh, quite astounding way. And these seeds were planted recently um, due to certain uh, factors that I usually use astrology at this point to explain those. But basically, we are in a place where there's a strong pull to uh, evolve forward uh, in all of these areas, and that is backed by the technology that we keep creating that continues to show us, uh, you know, where we could be, and then the pullback, and then there's the pullback from fear, and the old ways of doing things, and in many ways, just an illumination of the old ways of doing things. I'm talking in generalities here, so let me get a little specific. Things like the Arab Spring, this revolution that is and will change the entire Middle East, but not as quickly as we thought, because of the influence of of repression, of power, of fear, which creates a pullback. So we aren't able to make the progress that we thought we could, at least not right away. Same thing with certain situations in this country, such as, the Occupy movement. People, I think, had a false expectation of Occupy. For some reason, it seems to some people that it's not legitimate for anyone to protest a situation unless they have a detailed plan, to implement that will change the situation for the better. It's another way of trying to delegitimize protest in this country. The Occupy movement was a very powerful protest movement, which has illuminated the entire situation of income inequality, which is now the driving factor behind the campaign of Bernie Sanders, and also becoming increasingly important in Hillary Clinton's campaign as well. All of this started because a couple of protesters took over, camped out, and made a lot of noise. Okay, that's what they are supposed to do. They're not legislators. They're not supposed to go in with a plan and say, "Here, do this." That's the job of legislators. It's just really. Anyway, I shall calm down. So that's one example. Another example is in this country, the growing awareness and the light that's been shed upon, the role of, or the rather abusive role that law enforcement has been playing in many cities in this country in their dealings with African Americans and other minorities, which will tie in to our theme for this program, which is race and gender in the transition era, which we will get to shortly, I promise. And other factors throughout the world. We have the Russian campaign in Ukraine. Russia being the force that really wants to pull back, and Western Ukraine, the force that really wants to move forward, become more of a democratic state, become more free and independent. So this battle is being played out, and what it really is about is these changes are going to be made and they're going to happen, but they're being refined because pullbacks help to refine the changes so that they don't become changes that are implemented haphazardly or only briefly and then taken back. They become long-lasting changes, and the way they do that is through this process. And the planets, as I mentioned, that are involved in that are Uranus and Pluto. And just one more thing before I move on. As I mentioned, Uranus and Pluto. When those two planets work together, amazing change takes place on a social and worldwide scale, and that's what the situation was back in the 60s and the 70s, when Uranus and Pluto worked in conjunction together, and so we saw rapid and amazing movement forward in many areas. Now these two planets are not so much in tandem, but they're working still to make changes, but they're working in opposition with one another. So, as I said, you have the movement forward and the pull back. But the transition era is all about our transition to these new ways of being, these new ways of thinking, these new approaches, and scientific discoveries like gravitational waves. And now we know we have a better way of understanding what dark matter is and what it's doing. I mean, these are revealing things that are going to change our world for decades to come. So that's what the transition era is all about. And today, the topic is race and gender in the transition era. And I felt this was a particularly important topic because of the things that are happening, particularly this week, but in recent months, regarding the idea of what race means and what gender means, and the perception that people may have about themselves and about each other. Tonight, of course, is the Academy Awards, and one of the big issues about that award ceremony that's going on is the fact that there's a boycott going on. There's a movement called hashtags Oscar So White. The anger stems from there not being any African American nominees this year, and there weren't any last year in Best Actor categories or Best Director. But what the real issue is, because 2 years ago was an amazing year for African American directors and actors. We had quite a few nominations. Not so much for Hispanics, but yeah, there was a Hispanic director too that won. But we are really talking about these issues in a different way now. And gender too, we are looking at the possibly the first female president of the United States. Certainly she's running, a pretty strong campaign. And the way that gender is looked at, thought about, and the way that women think about themselves is also an issue. And I'm not going to I'm not going to weigh in particularly on one side of the equation or other. I mean, I think that there are interesting things to say about this issue that make, pronouncements not particularly helpful. Are there racial issues and racial barriers? Indeed, there are. Indeed, there are. We have the first African American president, and when he was elected, there was such a feeling of amazement and hope. And for many people, that meant, I think the term they used was post-racial society. And I guess what they meant by that was that racial discrimination wasn't going to exist anymore. Well, yeah, no, not really. Not really. Are there situations where tensions between police officers and racial groups such as African Americans or Hispanics are at an all-time high? Are police officers, in some cases, abusing their power over African American citizens and making poor choices? In some cases, killing black people? Yes, for sure. Is that the entirety of the situation? Of course not. Of course not. But is it an important issue to look at? Absolutely. Same thing with gender. There is a lot of talk about. I think the meme is women make 70 cents to every dollar a man makes, which is an interesting meme that isn't entirely true. In most jobs, as a matter of fact, pay is not determined by gender. But where that factor comes in, and I think the larger factor involved, is the way that jobs which are traditionally, but not even traditionally, jobs that are the jobs that women tend to go for. And again, that's a generalization, but I think it is more of a biological thing, and maybe some social, ingrained ideas too. But more women tend to go for the kinds of jobs that aren't very well valued in this society. Teachers, nurses, support people, executive assistants, and secretaries, and all of those people that actually make a company work. These are the kinds of jobs that don't get, that don't get the pay they deserve. I mean, teachers for, decades don't get paid very well. And the younger the children are that they serve, the less they get paid, which is really remarkable. And I'll come clean, full disclosure on some of these issues here. First of all, I am a mixed race man, and part of that mix is African American. So just to let you know, I do have some bias in that particular, issue. I also am very involved in working with young children and teaching young children. So again, I have a bias in that area too, because I see how underpaid people in that profession are. So much of the changes that we're going to see, much of the changes that we are seeing, have less to do with some of our traditional ways of looking at race and gender, and more to do with a systemic uh, change in the way that we value certain things and certain people and certain ways of being. The issue with the Oscars isn't that this year there weren't uh, African Americans nominated for roles. The issue is that we're still looking at roles in that way, black, white, Hispanic. And when we continue to view the world through the eyes of separation, oh, he's a black actor, oh, he's a black director, oh, he's an Hispanic actor, instead of being able to look at all actors as actors who all have an equal shot at a role, um, instead of looking at candidates, political candidates, as representative of a gender or a race, and looking at them as political identities. As long as we continue to see the world through separate eyes, there's always going to be this problem. Oh, more full disclosure, I suppose I should mention that since I was a kid, I've been involved in the acting business. I've had many auditions. I've lived in Los Angeles. I know what that business is like. And it is getting better. It's certainly better than it was when I was a kid. Certainly more opportunities and less discrimination in the casting rooms than there has been before. Particularly on television, you're seeing a much broader array of roles for African Americans, and there's even more Asians on. Not as many Hispanics, but some more. But what I'll say is, yeah, it is getting better. But one of the issues that they talk about is the fact that there are also very important roles behind the camera: directors, writers, and producers, and people in power in the studios who have the power to make decisions. And as long as we all are looking at things, as I say, through the eyes of separation, and we say, only a white person can do that role, or we need more black people in this role, or we need more Hispanics in this role. As long as we're dealing in that, nobody is going to ever be happy with anything. And that's what the transition era is going to bring to us. And we're going to have these discussions, and they're going to continue. And there's going to be, fire and ice on both sides. But where I believe we're going is a greater and fuller understanding of the importance and also the ultimately the silliness of these issues. I think what we will discover is when we are focused on certain aspects of identity, and limited identity too, racial identity, gender identity. When we are so focused on those things, and in some cases we have to be, because there's an issue of I look this way, or I'm in this form, so I don't get to do these certain things. And that's part of our human game too that we're playing. But eventually what we transition to is an understanding of the qualities that we all bring to the table. The interesting things that each person, each culture can bring to a job, to a role, to a film, to anything, really. And we begin to see beyond gender. We begin to see beyond our, racial identities, our tribal identities. And we begin to understand our oneness. And that's not to say, as some people will do, that I don't see color or I don't see gender. Of course you do. We all do. We chose to look the way we do. We chose the form that we wanted to be in this world at this much higher level that I've spoken about on the show, at this metaphysical level. We chose this. Okay. Now we're playing a role. We're playing in the game. Part of our illusory awareness is that we are experiencing unfairness due to something that we had no power over. And in the rules of the game that we're playing, that's true. But from the highest level that we're talking about, we chose to put ourselves in that situation. We chose to look the way we look for a reason. We chose to have the issues that we're having for a reason. We chose to experience these things for a reason. It's part of the adventure. It's part of the game. And at the end of the day, once we take our energy from it, we begin to reconnect, realize the illusion of it all and the truth of who and what we really are. But we got to play the game. And as long as we continue to be aware that it is a game, and that this is not the truth of who and what we are, that there's much more, we're in good shape. We'll get back to this topic over and over again.